Daniel Webster fixed his dark gaze on the other senators as he began his speech on March 7, 1850. I wish to speak today not as a Massachusetts man, nor as a Northern man, but as an American. I speak today for the preservation of the Union, the restoration to the country of that quiet and that harmony which make the blessings of the Union so rich and so dear to us all. Many of Webster's listeners shared his anxiety about the country's future, but the Senate was as divided as the rest of the country. What developments had robbed the country of harmony and threatened the Union? While the addition of new territories gave the country room to grow and expand, it also raised questions that brought deep divisions. In the mid-1800s, the United States grew vast new territories in the West. Eventually, those territories would become states. Would they be slave or would they be free states? The issue of slavery in the West would set the North against the South. The issue of slavery in the new states was not new. You read in chapter 12 that the Missouri Compromise of 1820 kept the number of slave states and free states equal. The Missouri Compromise applied only to those states carved out of the Louisiana Purchase. The Mexican Secession of 1848 added a vast stretch of western lands not covered by the Missouri Compromise. Once again, the question of slavery in the territories became. Even before the War with Mexico had ended, growing anti-slavery feelings in the North led the House of Representatives to pass the Wilmot Proviso. An anti-slavery Democrat, David Wilmot, introduced this measure. It would outlaw slavery in all territory acquired from Mexico. The bill was defeated in the Senate, where the North and the South were equally represented. The debate over slavery in the territory strengthens feelings of sectionalism. Southerners united in their support for slavery and accused the North of threatening their way of life. Northern abolitionists believed that slavery to be morally wrong and demanded that national government outlaw it. Some politicians suggested other ways to settle the question of slavery in the territories. Senator Lewis Cass of Michigan recommended that the voters who lived in the territory should decide whether the states they formed would be slave or free. The idea supported popular sovereignty. There seemed to be no way of reconciling the opposing views of slavery in the new territories. In the election of 1848, both Northerners and Southerners tried to downplay the discussion of slavery. The Democrats, although controlled by their Southern wing, nominated Northerner Senator Lewis Cass of Michigan as their presidential candidate. The Whigs, who enjoyed strong support in the North, nominated Zachary Taylor, a hero of the Mexican War who owned a plantation in Louisiana with more than 100 slaves. His running mate, Millard Fillmore, was a moderate New York politician. The birth of the Free Soil Party. Many Northern Whigs backed Taylor because he seemed a sure winner, but conscientious Whigs rebelled. They refused to back a slaveholder or risk opening the West to slavery. They broke with the Whigs and united with Northern Democrats to form their own party, the Free Soil Party. They chose former President Martin Van Buren as their candidate and campaigned with the slogan of free soil, free speech, free labor, and free men. Although Taylor became president, the Free Soil Party received an impressive number of votes. Clearly, the slavery issue hurt both parties. In January 1849, South Carolina Senator John C. Calhoun acted against what he saw as a threat to the Southern way of life. Calling a caucus of Southern members of Congress, he denounced the ordinance of 1787 and the Missouri Compromise of 1820 as a tax on the South. Calhoun claimed that any more similar Northern-sponsored measures would bring an end to slavery, start a race war, lead to rule by African Americans, Calhoun warned that the South would secede. Calhoun's views seemed too extreme for many people. Even slaveholding senators, including Sam Houston of Texas and Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri, opposed him. Many Southern newspapers also declared their loyalty to the Union. However, Southern members of Congress agreed with Calhoun. In the Southern states, some state legislatures, local conventions, and newspaper editors adopted his ideas. In Congress, debate over California statehood dragged on for a year. When Calhoun first talked of seceding, Representative Robert Toombs of Georgia loudly opposed any such move. Before 1849 ended, however, Toombs stood on the House and declared, "I am for disunion." The Compromise of 1850. To resolve the crisis, Congress turned to Senator Henry Clay. Clay had earned the nickname the Great Compromiser for working out the details of the Missouri Compromise in 1820. Now, 30 years later, the 73-year-old Clay used his charm and eloquence to persuade the Congress to compromise one more time. Clay's proposal. In January 1850, Clay presented a bill in Congress with the following provisions. First, admission of California as a free state. Second, the organization of New Mexico and Utah as territories with popular sovereignty. Third, payment to Texas for giving up some territory to New Mexico. Fourth, an end to the slave trade, but not slavery, in the District of Columbia. Fifth, the passage of a strict federal law enforcing the return of runaways or fugitive slaves. Clay designed the proposal to give both sides some of their demands. Eventually, the proposals would become the Compromise of 1850. Of course, there would be opposition and support. Senator Calhoun, so ill that he had to sit grimly in his seat while another senator read his speech for him, rejected any compromise as unfair to the South. His speech stated that some of the cords which bind these states together in one common union had already been broken or weakened by the North's hostility. He warned that continued unrest over slavery will snap every cord, so that nothing will be left to hold the states together except force. 3 days later, Senator Daniel Webster delivered a speech in favor of the compromise. Although he had been Clay's rival for decades, Webster supported Clay's attempt to save the Union. Like many Northerners, he disagreed with the institution of slavery. Breaking up the Union, however, seemed even worse. Webster was willing to compromise and support the South's demand for fugitive slaves at the return if doing so would save the Union. The angry debates continued. Even with Webster's support, Clay had to plead for his compromise again and again. By August, Clay realized his 5 proposals would have a better chance of passing separately. At this point, Stephen A. Douglas, a young senator from Illinois, hammered 5 bills out of Clay's proposal. Douglas guided each bill through and won Senate approval for all of them. So the compromise is passed. In September of 1850, Congress passed the bills. Together, they closely resembled Clay's original compromise proposal. President Taylor, who might have vetoed them, had died in July. His successor, Millard Fillmore, signed the bills into law. Webster wrote to a friend shortly after the passage of the bills, "I can now sleep of nights we have gone through the most important crisis that had occurred since the founding of the government, and whatever party may prevail hereafter, the Union stands firm." For a time, the compromise patched up the North-South quarrel, yet basic differences persisted. Many Southerners agreed with Calhoun's charges that the North had wronged the South. They also remembered his remedy, secession.